Can you tell me your name and tell me that you...
Dorothy F. Hicks, and I give my consent.
Okay. If you don't like the way you said something, just say, let me pick that up again, and you can start your thought again.
Okay.
So don't worry, it's not, you know, a high-pressure situation in any stretch of the imagination. Okay.
I'll second rolling.
All right, great. Can you tell me, please, may I call you Dot? Is that okay?
Please do.
All right.
All my friends do.
Okay, great. How you and your husband came to be involved with the smallpox eradication campaign?
My husband was here at this as a employee of the Centers for Disease Control, but had been transferred to Raleigh, North Carolina, and he was chief of venereal disease control as a federal assignee to the state. And we lived in Raleigh area and didn't have children after being married for quite a few years, and decided we would like to have a family. We progressed in adopting a little boy, and Jimmy came to live with us at 8 months, and we had our order in for a little girl, but Jimmy had to be 2 years of age before, under the law in North Carolina. And Jim didn't come home for lunch each day. He stayed at the office and went out with different people for lunch. And one day he came home and he walked in the house at lunchtime, and I said, "Are you feeling all right?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm fine, but I think you better sit down." And I said, "Why, are we being transferred to New York or Chicago?" Because he knew that was 2 places that I had worked at one time and did not want to go back to live there. And he said, "No," he said, "I've been asked to take a job in West Africa." And I said, "What are we going to do about the second child? When do you have to go?" He said, "Yesterday they wanted me there." And I said, "Let me call Josephine Kirk, who was the director at that time of the agency." And I said, "Josephine," I said, "we're supposed to get a little girl, and Jim's being sent over to West Africa." And she said, "Dot, if you would take a boy, we've got a precious little boy you could take." And I said, "But we don't even have birth certificates yet for Jimmy because he's not 2 yet." And she said, "Well, we'll work something out." And I said, "Well, Jimmy has asthma, and I don't know how that's going to affect things." And of course, Jim told Dave Sencer, who at the time was the director here, and they said that they'd get a waiver on it from Washington, which they did. And Jim left, and I was there until the house was sold, and then he came back to go over with us. So that was how I wound up in Lagos, Nigeria.
Okay, and what were your first impressions when you arrived in Lagos with 2 children
in diapers?
Okay, tell me when I first got to...
We came in from Switzerland where it was snowing, and when we arrived at the airport, they actually told us from the plane that it was very hot, and we of course had winter clothes on. So when we deplaned, it wasn't like any airport here. It was like airports used to be in this country, where you had to deplane out on the tarmac and walk in, and as we walked in, there were guards with guns, and you had to walk through them to go into their security. And I wasn't used to that, of course, and it wasn't 9/11 yet, so we weren't used to this kind of security. And we got through security, and they had a car waiting to take us to a residence which I had never seen. I had no idea where we would be going. And I was amazed that as we left the airport to head to Lagos, it was no street lights, very few paved roads, But along the roads there were little stands that people obviously had made, and the only light was by candlelight to sell their wares. And so that was my first impression, and then I was a bit apprehensive about where are we going to be living? What are we going to be living in? I didn't know whether it was a thatched hut or what it was going to be. But when we drove in, it was a compound, and the housing had been provided by the government, and it turned out to be a very nice home. And our only concern when we arrived is we were told by one of the physicians here who had been over there that they were concerned about having the two boys because the stairs were different than any stairs that we have here. They didn't have backing to the stairs, and with the children that small, they were concerned about when they started to crawl and get around. But we never had any problem with it. I mean, we were there when they were going up and down the stairs, and just things like that. But it was a very nice compound. The housing was provided, and the furniture was provided, and they had already, by the guidelines, you had to hire locals to work for you while you were there. They had secured a nanny for us, a cook, and cooks do not clean the house, so we had to have a houseboy to clean. And then, like dumb Americans going into that kind of an environment, we, in our sea freight, sent over a lawnmower. But we found out when it arrived that that's not what they use over there. They use machetes to cut the grass. It was little things like this, but I thank God that we had a chance to see another culture.
I imagine you learned some things and had some, whoops, hold on one second. Had some experiences that you'll just never, ever forget. And in just a moment when he's back, I'll ask you about that. Everything okay, Anna?
I think we might be running a little behind schedule.
A little behind? Okay.
But that's okay. She said to go ahead.
Okay. The next person is supposed to be at 10:30.
We'll continue.
That's what I have. David Thompson.
Apparently
he's here.
Was already here.
Okay. All right. Well,
but
we'll be
that's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you find the people of Nigeria? Were they welcoming to you? And
Very friendly. They had guards. You know, we were there during the Biafran War with the eastern region, the oil region of Nigeria, and the military capital was in Lagos. And the war occurred while we were there. And we, as Americans, were wives and children, were given the opportunity to evacuate, but we could not come back. And we chose as a family to be together, even though Jim was traveling throughout the entire 19 countries, I believe it was. May have been 20, I don't remember. And it was an experience then that I hadn't expected.
What would you say the impact of this experience was on your family, on the boys growing up, and on your own view of the world?
My view of the world is we don't know how fortunate we are. I wish I could convey that to people. And when people are poor in this country, I haven't seen anything in this country, as many places as we've lived, that would be anything like living in an environment like that. When you see children that are sold from one clan to another to work, and they'd come to our back door in the morning carrying bread, loaves of bread to sell at the back doors for the people. Little tiny loaves, precious children. There's things like that, and children with swollen bellies that you thought, boy, that child had too much to eat. And then you find out that it wasn't that they had too much to eat. They weren't getting enough to eat. it's hard to convey to somebody.
Kind of breaks your heart, I'm
It
sure.
does.
Especially when you're raising children of the same age.
Yeah. But both of our sons now really don't remember anything because Jimmy became very ill with his asthma overseas after we were there for 2 years, and had been hospitalized over there around 20 or 22 times. And Jim was out of Nigeria in one of the other countries, and they sent a cable and told him to come back because they didn't think he was going to make it. And they decided to send us home.
It must have been taking a lot of courage for you to be the mother and trying to hold down the fort at home while this was happening and
Well,
your husband traveling. Yeah.
So we were there about 2 years, going on 3 years, before we left. And we couldn't come straight home by plane. They wanted us to stop in major cities because of if he had an attack. He's now 42 years of age and is a chemical engineer with Solvay. And why he chose to take chemical engineering, I don't know, but he's in polymers, so he said, Mom, the computers, we develop it on the computer, and if it explodes, we don't do it. But it's things like this.
Do you remember how you felt when it was announced that smallpox had been eradicated?
Elated. Absolutely. Jim continued to work in smallpox from here and would leave and go over for 6 weeks at a time and that sort of thing. But it was an experience that I'm thankful we were able to have.
And did you see values in Nigeria maybe that you thought were powerful, whether it's family?
Absolutely family. The mothers, if they can afford to do it, they keep their children. And they try to take care of their children and will feed the children before the parents. You see the little children laughing, and they don't realize what the situation is. They're not used to having a plate full of food, and I can remember my dad telling me when I was growing up that you have to clean that plate now. There's a lot of poor people in the world. Well, we were poor, but I didn't know it till I grew up. You know, when you get to be in your 70s, you remember those days.
And do you think that this experience really shaped your husband's career and his work that he did thereafter?
Oh yes, absolutely. He'd been with public health, with CDC, was hired from Tampa Health Department after graduating from, am I allowed to say he's a Gator?
Sure. Go Gators. Okay. And you yourself, did you ever work outside the home? Or?
I was teaching the police, Nigerian police, equestrian. I, for years, showed hunters and jumpers and 3- and 5-gated saddle horses. And when I went over, we met a Nigerian man, and he was saying that, I mentioned that he had a police officer, and I knew that he was in charge of the police at that time there. And I was going to market one day with the boys, and I saw this police officer. This is one of the things you may want to edit out. He had dismounted from his horse, had urinated, and couldn't get back on the horse again. So I stopped the car and went over to him, and I said, I could make that easy for you. And he said, how? And I said, you lower the stirrup. And so I showed him how to lower the stirrup and how to put his foot in it, and gave him a boost up. I was a lot smaller than him, but when he and so they asked me if I would help them, and I was doing that. They have a polo ground in Lagos, And we actually lived on the island of Akoya, which is connected by a very small bridge. You don't even realize that it's an island until you go over the little bridge and wonder what it's doing there for. You think it's a drainage ditch. I was amazed at the fact that the sewage, it's open sewers, and before you could go into your own home, and this was a precaution, that you would wash your feet at the door, take your shoes off or anything like that. You just didn't go in and out when you were down in that area. And it was, there was water there. We wound up with a boat and used to take the boys out to a little island that the embassy had. We'd take them to one of the hotels that they had, and they had a little pond like, and the children would push their little sailboats around that, and we'd have high tea in the afternoon on a Sunday. And we were fortunate enough, we were Christians, and when we went over, we went to the First Baptist Church of Lagos with our sons. The first Sunday we were there, and the service was in the Yoruba tongue, and we knew the music, but it was sung in Yoruba. And when I said to Jim as we were leaving, gosh, our sons will never understand the language, and we certainly don't understand it. And as we were having said that, a couple walked up to us. Quite honestly, we were the only white people in there, except I thought we were the only ones there, but there was another couple, an older couple, that came over and introduced themselves, and they were sent over by the Southern Baptist Convention as missionaries and had been in Africa for many years. And we found out that their residence was just around the corner from our house. So they became like grandparents to our children while they were there. And we mentioned to them that, you know, our children will never understand the sermon or the Bible, and we read it to them, but I mean, they need to do something. And she said, well, do you think y'all would be interested in trying to help to formulate an English-speaking church here? And we said, yes, of course. And to make a long story short, we were able to do that. We didn't have a preacher every Sunday, so Jim would take one Sunday, and then there was another couple from Gulf Arabian American Oil that were Baptists, and they came and he would preach one Sunday. And then there was a Nigerian man who was part of the Southern Baptist Convention, but African, and he traveled in Nigeria from one place to another to do services, so he wasn't always there. And before we left, they had received enough money. We were in a school on Sunday morning, and a lot of the Nigerian young people were in university chose to come to the English speaking because most of them had learned English when they were out of country in the UK or in the United States, and they wanted to continue the language because I guess a lot of them chose to go elsewhere to live.
Did you feel isolated when you were there? I mean, I know it was very tough in those years you couldn't call home easily.
No, you had to make an appointment to call home. As a matter of fact, when I was there, I received a wire through the embassy that my grandfather had passed away. And it was during the Biafran situation where if I had left the country, I could not come back. And by the time I got the message, he was already buried, but I found that out because I had to make an appointment to make a long-distance call. And when I finally got through to my parents, he was already buried. So that was one of the factors. And the children reached a point where a lot of, when we came back to the States, they were speaking some of the Yoruba tongue. And the worst part of it was that our help were not all of the same tribe, and there were 3 different dialects spoken in our house, not including the English. And so they would start to talk, say little things when they were leaving, you know, and when they came back.
Were you concerned that the children, aside from the asthma, would be affected by illnesses over there? Did your family, you or your husband, ever become ill?
No, not at all. We had a physician at the embassy. I couldn't find him at the time that Jimmy went code blue, but one of our own physicians, Dr. Stan Foster, I called his residence, and the help said that he was out playing tennis. And I said, can you get a message to him that I need help? And Jim was out of country at the time. And Stan was a lifesaver to us to get us over. He tried to work with Jimmy at home for a short time and saw that it wasn't going to work. So he drove, and of course we were stopped by, because of the war, we were stopped by soldiers for security and wanted to go through the car and all that, and he was able to get through to them that this was an emergency and we had to get him to the hospital. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.